The silence hit the room harder than a physical blow. It wasn't a quiet lull in conversation, but a sudden, collective intake of breath. The kind that happens when the world shifts on its axis and the brain struggles to catch up with the eyes. Sebastian Wolfe set his crystal tumbler down with a deliberate, metallic click. Across the winter diamond gala, the kind of room where the floral arrangements cost more than a mid-sized suburban home, the atmosphere had curdled from celebration to pure, frozen shock. Every titan of industry had stopped mid-sentence. Every gaze was anchored to the landing of the grand staircase, and Sebastian finally saw why. Olivia Hayes was standing there, framed by the arched gold molding. Olivia, who organized his color-coded calendar, who fetched his triple-shot espressos without being asked, and who had spent the last 6 months enduring his silent glares for an entry-level salary while sitting at a desk that didn't even have a window. That Olivia was draped in a gown that made the high society silks around her look like rough burlap. It was a starlight fabric, a deep, midnight violet that seemed to pull the light from the room and hold it captive. Thousands of raw, hand-cut diamonds were woven into the textile, cascading from her shoulders like a falling meteor shower. The craftsmanship was hauntingly precise, an impossible feat of hand tooling that defied modern manufacturing. "Is that?" someone near the bar whispered before the words died in their throat. "That's a Hayes artisan original," a man replied, his voice strained with disbelief. "I appraised the private collection for the Louvre." "That dress, that's the celestial heirloom from the founder's private vault." "That piece isn't on the market," a woman hissed behind her hand. "It's a family legacy. It was never for sale." Sebastian felt the ballroom floor tilt beneath his polished Oxfords. This was the woman he had invited as a punchline to a cruel joke. No, this wasn't how his night was supposed to go. If you're watching this and already hooked, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Comment below the time and where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story reaches. Let's get into the full story. 3 days before the floor tilted beneath Sebastian's feet, the air in the Wolfe Industries executive suite was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the cold hum of high-altitude air conditioning. Olivia Hayes moved through the room with the practiced silence of someone who had learned that being seen was a liability. She placed the triple-shot espressos on the mahogany table, her movements fluid and precise, a ghost in a charcoal blazer. Sebastian didn't look up as she set his cup down. He was leaning back in his leather chair, a shark-like grin spreading across his face as he looked at the 2 board members flanking him. "You know," Sebastian said, his voice carrying that jagged edge of feigned generosity that always made Olivia's stomach turn. "I was looking at the guest list for the Winter Diamond Gala. It's the most exclusive event in the city. Tickets are more than most people's annual rent." He paused, waiting for Olivia to reach the edge of the rug before calling her name. "Olivia." She stopped, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral. She had spent 6 months perfecting this mask, hiding the artisan soul that could identify the carat weight of a stone from across a room. "I've decided you should attend," Sebastian continued, sliding a gold-embossed invitation across the polished wood. "I'm hosting a table. It's time you saw how the other half lives, don't you think?" The board members exchanged a glance, their silence stretching like a taunt. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe," Olivia replied, her voice steady. "Don't worry about the dress code," Sebastian added, the cruelty finally breaking through his smile. "Just wear whatever you have in that closet of yours. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate." The laughter didn't start until she was halfway down the hall. It was quiet and vicious, the sound of people who believed their bank accounts gave them the right to be predators. "Can you imagine?" One of them whispered loudly enough for the sound to trail after her. "She's going to show up looking like a bargain bin disaster. Everyone in that room will know exactly where she belongs." Inside the break room, Olivia stood very still. Her hands didn't shake as she rinsed a stray spoon, but her mind moved somewhere else entirely. She had taken this job to prove she was more than her father's shadow, to see if she could survive in a world that didn't know her name. She had endured the dismissiveness and the invisible treatment, but this public attempt to break her dignity, was the final straw. She pulled her phone from her pocket and stared at a contact she hadn't touched since she left the estate. The experiment was over. "Father," she said quietly when the line picked up, "I need the celestial heirloom, and I need it by Saturday." The memory of the vault didn't smell like a basement. It smelled like ozone and ancient velvet. Long before Olivia Hayes learned how to be invisible in a corporate hallway, she lived in a world where every surface was designed to reflect her own face back at her. While other children were learning to ride bicycles, Olivia was learning the weight of light. Her father, the legendary Marcus Hayes, didn't give her dolls. He gave her a jeweler's loupe and a tray of raw, unpolished stones that cost more than a fleet of private jets. The Hayes family estate sat behind 3 layers of biometric security, a fortress built on the premise that the rarest things in the world must be kept out of sight. In the center of that fortress was the vault. It was a room of temperature-controlled silence, where the air felt heavy with the history of empires. Olivia spent her afternoons sitting on a velvet stool, her small fingers tracing the architectural facets of diamonds that had once sat on royal balconies. Her father would stand behind her, his voice a low hum of instruction. "A stone doesn't have a soul until a human gives it one, Olivia," he would say. "Never forget that the person who cuts the diamond is the one who truly owns its light." By the time she was 16, Olivia's work was already appearing in the most exclusive publications on 3 continents, though always under a pseudonym. She had grown up inside an empire of brilliance, moving through London and Paris with a name that opened doors so fast she never had to knock. But that was the problem. Every accolade she received felt like an inheritance rather than an achievement. She couldn't separate her own talent from the gravity of the Hayes name. She didn't know if the world was applauding her work or her father's bank account. At 24, the realization had become a suffocating weight. She had looked at her reflection in a display case at a museum in Amsterdam and realized she was just another piece of the family collection, precious, protected, and entirely defined by someone else. She needed to know who Olivia was when the light wasn't being reflected off a Hayes diamond. She had made a deal with her father, 1 year of total anonymity. No family funds, no famous name, and a real job in a city where no one knew her face. She wanted to find out if she could stand on her own 2 feet, even if those feet were tired from standing on a kitchen floor. She had gone looking for her own shadow, never imagining she would find it in the cold, dismissive eyes of Sebastian Wolfe. Olivia chose Chicago because it was a city of steel and wind, a place that didn't care about the history of gemstones or the weight of a dynasty. She had traded a penthouse in Mayfair for a studio apartment with a mattress that was too soft and windows that rattled whenever the L train roared past. Her new life was measured in the sharp ache of her feet after an 8-hour shift and the quiet dignity of a paycheck that didn't have her father's signature on it. She had spent 7 months becoming a ghost, learning what it meant to stand in a room and have people look through her as if she were made of glass. Working for Sebastian Wolfe was the ultimate test of her resolve. He was a man who spoke to his staff the way a person speaks to a piece of furniture, necessary for comfort, but entirely beneath notice. Olivia watched him from the periphery of his high-stakes meetings, seeing the way he leveraged power like a blunt instrument. She had listened to him belittle assistants and ignore the very people who kept the gears of his empire turning. Every time he snapped his fingers for a coffee or tossed a dry-cleaning receipt at her without looking up, Olivia felt the temptation to speak, to reveal the lineage that could buy and sell his firm 3 times over. But she stayed quiet. She wanted to know if her value was something she carried inside her, or if it was merely a projection of the Hayes vault. She had learned to find a different kind of pride in the silence, the pride of being the most competent person in the room while being the least recognized. She had planned to finish the full year, to see the experiment through to its natural end. Then came the invitation to the gala. It wasn't just the offer, it was the smirk that accompanied it, the deliberate attempt to use her perceived poverty as a source of entertainment for his wealthy peers. Sebastian didn't just want her at the party. He wanted to see her stumble, to see her realize her place in a room full of diamonds. He didn't realize that Olivia Hayes had been born among diamonds. As she walked home that evening, the city lights reflecting in the puddles like scattered jewels, Olivia realized that she had proven what she needed to prove to herself. It was time to stop being quiet. It was time to remind Sebastian Wolfe that some things in this world are not for sale. The rattling of the L train outside her window usually sounded like poverty and persistence, but tonight it sounded like a countdown. Olivia sat on the edge of her sagging mattress, the glow of her burner phone the only light in the cramped studio apartment. For 7 months, she had been a ghost by choice, but Sebastian Wolfe had tried to turn her into a ghost by force. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted the poor assistant to provide a moment of cheap amusement for the elite. She took a breath that tasted of city dust and resolve, then dialed a number that wasn't saved in her contacts but was etched into her DNA. The line didn't ring, it simply connected. "Identity?" a voice asked, low, neutral, and terrifyingly efficient. This was the Hayes security detail, a group of men who operated in the shadows of the global jewelry trade. "Olivia Hayes," she said. Her voice didn't waver. It had the same architectural precision as the diamonds she had grown up with. "Authorization code, 7 Delta 9 Sierra. I am ending the protocol." There was a heartbeat of silence, the sound of a digital seal breaking across an ocean. "Welcome back, Miss Hayes," the voice replied, now softened with a hint of warmth. "Your father has been waiting. How can the estate assist you?" "I need the vault opened," Olivia said, her eyes fixed on the peeling wallpaper of her apartment. "I need the celestial heirloom, and I don't want it shipped. I want the extraction team in Chicago by dawn. I want the full artisan kit, the raw diamond setting tools, and a secure perimeter. The heirloom has not been moved in 20 years, Miss Hayes. Your father kept it as a centerpiece for the museum's opening." "Then he can tell the museum it has a prior engagement," Olivia countered. "I'm going to a party and I intend to be dressed appropriately." When she hung up, the silence of the room felt different. It was no longer the silence of a woman hiding. It was the silence of a predator waiting. She looked at her hands, reddened from the harsh cleaning chemicals of Wolfe's office and the steam of 1,000 coffee cups. She didn't mind the work, but she hated the blindness of the man who demanded it. Sebastian Wolfe thought he knew what she was worth because he knew her salary. He was about to learn that in the world of the Hayes legacy, price was a vulgar concept, and true value was something you couldn't buy. It was something you inherited or something you built. Tomorrow, the invisible girl would cease to exist, and the woman who knew the soul of a stone would take her place. The extraction team arrived at 4:00 a.m., moving with the quiet efficiency of ghosts. They didn't belong in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the air smelled of wet pavement and diesel, yet they stepped into Olivia's studio apartment as if it were a high-security terminal in Zurich. They placed the reinforced titanium case on her scarred kitchen table, right next to a half-empty box of generic cereal and a stack of overdue utility bills. When the lead technician entered the biometric sequence, the hiss of the pressurized seal sounded like a long-held breath finally being released. The lid pulled back, and for a moment, the dingy yellow light of the studio apartment seemed to vanish. The celestial heirloom didn't just sit there. It pulsed. It was a gown of midnight violet silk velvet, so dark it looked like a tear in the fabric of reality, but it was the diamonds that stole the air from the room. These weren't the polished, polite stones found in mall jewelry stores. These were raw, architectural shards of light, hand-woven into the bodice in a pattern that mimicked the chaotic beauty of a nebula. The contrast was jarring, almost violent. $2 million of heritage and craftsmanship sat inches away from a chipped laminate countertop. The hem of the gown, stiff with 1,000 microscopic diamonds, brushed against a floor that Olivia had mopped herself just yesterday with cheap lemon-scented soap. "It's exactly as you left it, Miss Hayes," the technician whispered, his voice hushed by the sheer weight of the object before them. Olivia reached out, her fingers, calloused from months of filing papers and carrying Sebastian's heavy leather briefcases, tracing the cold, sharp edges of the stones. For 7 months, she had lived in the gray scale of a life defined by enough. Enough for rent, enough for groceries, enough to survive. Looking at the dress, she realized that Sebastian Wolfe didn't just want her to be poor, he wanted her to be small. He wanted her to fit into the cramped dimensions of this room forever. She didn't feel like a ghost anymore. As the team began the grueling 6-hour process of fitting the structural bodice to her frame, Olivia looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Behind her, the celestial heirloom glowed against the backdrop of her peeling wallpaper, a beacon of defiant brilliance. She wasn't just putting on a dress, she was reassembling a shattered identity. The studio apartment felt smaller than ever, not because it had changed, but because Olivia Hayes had finally outgrown it. By the time the sun rose over the Chicago skyline, the transformation was complete. The girl who fetched the coffee was gone, replaced by a woman who wore the stars as armor. The silence in the Meridian Grand Ballroom was no longer an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. Sebastian Wolfe stood at the center of a circle of his most powerful investors, the men and women who held the keys to his next billion-dollar merger, but his eyes were fixed upward. His glass leaned precariously in his hand, a drop of amber scotch staining the white cuff of his shirt, unnoticed. Olivia Hayes descended the staircase with the slow, rhythmic grace of a woman who had walked on marble her entire life. With every step, the raw diamond sewn into her gown caught the light, sending jagged shards of brilliance dancing across the faces of the elite. She didn't look like an assistant playing dress-up. She looked like the person the room had been built for. "Olivia." Sebastian's voice finally broke the tension, though it was thin, stripped of its usual corporate thunder. He stepped toward the base of the stairs as she reached the final landing. "What is this? What are you wearing?" A cruel, reflexive laugh bubbled up in his throat, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. He looked at his investors, looking for a shared smirk. "I told her to wear whatever she had in her closet. I didn't realize she'd gone into debt for a costume." Olivia didn't flinch. She stopped 3 feet from him, standing exactly as tall as he did, her expression as unyielding as the stones on her bodice. "It's not a costume, Sebastian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the room's silence it carried to every corner. It was the voice of a woman who had spent months listening and was finally ready to be heard. "And it isn't from a bargain bin. It's the Hayes celestial heirloom. My father, Marcus, designed it for my mother. It hasn't left our family vault in 20 years. The name Hayes rippled through the circle of investors like a shockwave. Sebastian's lead financier, a man who usually treated Sebastian like a god, stepped forward, his eyes wide. "Hayes, as in the Hayes Artisan House." Olivia turned her gaze to the investor, offering a nod of professional acknowledgement. "My father is traditional, Mr. Sterling. He believes in the invisible hands that craft the beauty. I came to Wolfe Industries to see if a man like Sebastian could see the value in someone without the name." She turned back to Sebastian, whose face had drained of all color. "For 6 months, I've managed your life. I've fixed your mistakes, protected your reputation, and carried your bags. And in all that time, you never once looked at me. You only looked at my price tag." She reached out and calmly straightened his crooked tie, her fingers brushing the silk. "You invited me here tonight to be a joke, Sebastian. But the only person the room is laughing at now is the man who was too blind to recognize a Hayes when she was standing right in front of him." The silence that followed Olivia's revelation was more than social. It was financial. Sebastian watched as the faces of his investors shifted from curiosity to a cold, predatory assessment. In the world of high-stakes private equity, reputation was the only currency that truly mattered, and Sebastian's bank account was suddenly bottoming out. Mr. Sterling, the man Sebastian had spent 18 months courting for the multi-billion-dollar merger with the European luxury group, took a slow step away from Sebastian. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes fixed on the celestial heirloom, with a reverence he had never shown Sebastian's quarterly reports. "The merger," Sterling began, his voice dropping into a register of terrifying neutrality. "The entire deal was predicated on securing an exclusive partnership with a heritage artisan house to anchor the luxury portfolio. We've been trying to get a meeting with Marcus Hayes for 3 years. He doesn't answer our calls." Sebastian felt a cold sweat prickle at his hairline. He looked at Olivia, really looked at her, and saw the way the light from the chandeliers seemed to congregate around her, making her the only sharp object in a room of blurred edges. "Sterling, wait," Sebastian stammered, his hands hovering in the air as if he could physically catch the departing confidence of the room. "This changes nothing. She's my employee. She understands the firm's vision. We can leverage this." "I'm not a lever, Sebastian," Olivia said, her voice cutting through his desperation like a diamond through glass. She turned to Sterling, the movement of her gown sounding like a soft metallic warning. "Mr. Sterling, you should know that my father doesn't answer your calls because he values the soul of the craft over the scale of the acquisition. He believes that when a company treats its own people like disposable furniture, it will treat its art the same way." The color left Sebastian's face entirely. He realized with a sickening lurch that the joke he had planned had become the rope he used to hang his own career. He had spent months mocking the woman who held the keys to his future, treating the heir to the Hayes empire as a servant simply because she had the humility to do the work. "The merger is dead, Sebastian," Sterling said, tucking his hands into his pockets. "I don't invest in men who are too arrogant to see the brilliance standing right in front of them. It's a liability." As the investors began to disperse, leaving a vacuum of space around him, Sebastian stood paralyzed. He was a billionaire in a room full of billionaires. But as Olivia walked past him toward the balcony, he had never felt more small. He wasn't the shark anymore. He was just a man in an expensive suit, finally realizing that the help had been the only one with any real power. The terrace air was sharp, a cold contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. Olivia leaned against the stone balustrade, the city lights below mimicking the diamonds on her skin. She heard the frantic, uneven rhythm of footsteps behind her before she heard his voice. "Olivia, wait, please." Sebastian stumbled through the French doors, his composure entirely unspooled. The shark had become a panicked fish in shallow water. He reached out as if to touch her arm, but stopped a foot away, deterred by the sheer, cold radiance of the celestial heirloom. "I didn't know," he rasped, his voice cracking. "How could I have known? If you had just told me who your father was, things would have been different. We can fix this. I'll make you a partner. We'll announce the Hayes-Wolfe merger tonight. I'll apologize publicly." "Just tell Sterling you were testing me. Tell him it was a game we played." Olivia turned slowly. She didn't look angry, she looked pitying. The wind caught the midnight violet silk, making the raw diamonds hiss softly against one another. "That's the problem, Sebastian," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. "You think the apology is the currency that buys back the wreckage. You think my name is what makes me valuable. It's the most powerful name in the industry." He shot back, his eyes darting toward the ballroom where his future was currently evaporating. "Of course it matters." "No," Olivia countered. "It's what makes me expensive. There is a difference." She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. For the first time, he didn't see an assistant. He saw a master artisan who knew exactly how to find the flaw in a stone. "Value is what I gave you for 6 months. It was the brilliance I brought to your chaotic schedules, the loyalty I showed while you insulted me, and the craftsmanship I applied to every task you deemed too small for your time. That had immense worth and it was free, but you couldn't see it because it didn't come with a price tag." Sebastian opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand. "You don't want me, Sebastian. You want my father's signature. You're still looking at the dress, not the woman wearing it. You spent tonight trying to make me feel small so you could feel significant, but all you've done is prove that without your money and your title, you are the most invisible person in that room." She reached into the small hidden pocket of the gown and pulled out her corporate ID badge, the one with the grainy photo of the invisible girl. She laid it on the balustrade between them. "I'm not quitting because of the joke, Sebastian. I'm quitting because I've finally learned the difference between value and worth. You have a lot of the former, but absolutely none of the latter." She walked past him, the hem of her $2 million dress brushing his expensive shoes like a final, silent dismissal. Sebastian stayed on the terrace, clutching the railing, finally understanding that some things couldn't be bought back once they were broken. 8 months later, the air in the loft district of Chicago felt different, less like grit and more like possibility. The space Olivia had chosen for her studio wasn't a gleaming corporate tower or a hidden vault. It was an old watch factory with floor-to-ceiling windows that invited the light in rather than trying to trap it. There were no biometric scanners here, only a heavy oak door and a small, understated brass plate that read, Hayes Artisan Collective. Inside, the atmosphere was a symphony of focused creation. Olivia moved between the workbenches, no longer a ghost in a charcoal blazer, but a master in her element. She wore a simple linen tunic, her hands stained with jeweler's rouge and the fine silver dust of her trade. She stopped at a bench where a young woman, a former hotel maid Olivia had met during her months of anonymity, was carefully setting a sapphire. "The tension is in the seat, not the prongs," Olivia said softly, her voice carrying the same hum of instruction she had once heard from her father. "Respect the stone's edge, and it will hold its own light." Her debut collection, titled The Unseen, had taken the industry by storm, but not for the reasons the tabloids expected. It wasn't a line for billionaires. It was a partnership program where domestic workers and overlooked laborers were trained in the technical arts of stone setting and metalwork, earning equity in every piece they created. Olivia had reconciled her heritage with her journey. She was using the Hayes name to give a voice to the invisible hands she had worked alongside. On her desk sat a single, unopened envelope from Wolfe Industries, a formal liquidation notice. Sebastian's firm had been absorbed by a larger conglomerate months ago, his name scrubbed from the letterhead. She didn't feel triumph as she moved it toward the recycling bin. She felt a profound, quiet peace. She had gone looking for her identity in the shadows of a skyscraper and found it in the calluses on her own palms. As the sun began to set, bathing the studio in a warm, golden hue, the L train rattled past the window. Olivia didn't flinch at the sound. She looked at her reflection in a polished silver tray on the table. She wasn't looking at an heiress, and she wasn't looking at a victim of a cruel joke. She was looking at a woman who had stripped away everything, the money, the access, the name, and found that the brilliance remained. She had walked into a gala in a $2 million dress to prove a point, but she had walked into this studio to build a life. The experiment was over, and for the first time, Olivia Hayes was exactly where she was meant to be. And that's a wrap on this one. If you made it all the way to this ending, you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what your favorite moment was. Let me know below. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? There are more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. I'll see you in the next story.